They named the continent Sable Verge because it looked like the edge of something finished. Obsidian spires rose from plains of vitrified sand, and the wind combed the slopes as if smoothing the planet's dark hair. In the first hour of dawn, the sun lifted as a leaden coin, and all the edges shone at the base of the western ridge. The Mornclaw woke to emptiness. She lifted her head from the cradle of her forepaws and tasted the air with a slow, deliberate yawn that showed the hinge of her jaw and the serried crescents of enamel. The cave was colder than it should have been. The scent map that always lay like a luminous grid in her mind had a hole in it where they should be. 3 bright pulses, recent and constant, gone. The rock pressed her ribs as she stood. Fractured glass pebbled the floor like frost. She patted once around the den, nosed the hollow where the cubs had slept. No blood, no predator musk, no drag marks, just the faintest ribbon of something strange, the metallic green tang of resin, the sharpness of ozone, and a residue that made the membranes of her nostrils prickle processed air. She curled the tip of her tail and stepped out of the cave. On the slope below, morning wind moved through the scrimshawed vents that laced the ridge, drawing long notes from the percussive stone. Her kind's lament had taught the ridge to sing. The singing had given her kind a name. She sent a call down the ravine, not a challenge but a threat, a low, shuddering hum that reached for small bones and soft ears. It rolled in the hollows, came back to her faceted and empty. The cubs did not answer. She climbed higher, and the world unfurled, scorched plains, the pale bruises of salt flats, the colony like a silver seed caught in a crack. She narrowed her eyes. The Fahrenheit had brought its own sun, burning day and night above the domes. The tethered glow lit the sterile paths, the towers, the rail spines where machines crawled. She had taught her cubs to avoid it. She had taught them the scent of danger like a story repeated for comfort. This is bitter. This is bright. This you go round. Their small bodies had memorized her breath. The wind shifted. That prickle again. She went down. In habitat S3, the morning shift yawned into being like a system warming. The recirculators ran a little loud because the filters were overdue. Condensation ticked from the seams of a conduit and collected in a dish. Someone had forgotten to move. In the mess, a cook poured coffee substitute into a row of stained mugs and muttered, "Don't call it coffee unless you've met one." In the med bay, Cullen slept. He dreamed of heat and slow rivers. The fever did that, laid a quilt of ancient summers over his mind, and asked him to remember every insect he never knew. He had caught the fever from the slag fields, so the med unit said likely, through microfissures in the suit after a glass sleet squall. It wasn't deadly, just hungry. It ate attention and returned it as hallucination. Now he lay on a cot with his forearm cuffed to a line of saline and micronutrients. Monitors glowed dimly behind fogged covers. His boots sat under the cot like obedient, exhausted dogs. The neurotherm pad beneath his shoulders hummed. An old tear on his knuckle, shaped like a crescent, pulsed with remembered pain. A face peeled itself out of the heat river in his dream. It looked like his mother's when she was young, though she had never stepped foot on any planet but the one with gulls and wet tar and orange light. She said something his fever wouldn't let him catch. Her hair streamed in a current that went uphill. He reached for her and the river hardened to glass. Somewhere beyond the glass, something small made the noise of a stifled sneeze. Cullen shifted. The neurotherm adjusted. He sank back into sleep. Dr. Alira Cohn was awake before the alarms because she never trusted alarms to tell her what mattered. She had been a xenobiologist longer than she had been a colonist. On 3 different worlds, she had learned that change arrived quiet, a hole in a pattern, a damper note in a familiar chorus, a scent that shouldn't be there and had no name yet. The Mornclaws had taught her, with their intricate roots and nightly songs, that fear and intelligence could coexist in one immense, gracile body. Alira stood at the observation slit built into the basalt at the edge of Dome. The glass was scored with micro-impacts. To run one's finger along it was to feel a constellation of near catastrophes. She sipped something that had once aspired to tea. The ridge hummed under the dawn wind. Alira listened. She had come to know the Mornclaw's calls by their intervals, like a music that respected gravity. The matriarch's morning pulse always 3 short, 1 long. A cadence she had learned to expect didn't come. In its place, a searching tone, extended and tight, like someone tightening a thread until it sang. She set her cup down and toggled the learning array. Small nodes woke with emerald glows out in the rocks where she had planted them months ago. The wide lens atop the array turned and blinked a map of the ridge onto the glass. Temperature gradients, motion traces, the slow river of CO. Elira watched the model for the matriarch flash to the mouth of the den. Then she watched it descend the slope toward the plane with a speed that made her stomach seize. She pinged security. "Rourke, Cone here." A voice came back gravelly and annoyed. "Cone, you know what time. She's coming down. Fast. And her call it's wrong." There was the rustle of a chair and the clatter of a mug. "On it. Lockdown Protocol 6. Don't go outside." "I'm already outside," Elira said, and ended the call. She didn't move from the glass. The array stitched a trail. The Mornclaw was sliding between stones, using shadows like doorways. Elira tapped a command to wake the drone net, not the weapons platform. Never that if it could be avoided, but the flock of small camera drones, whose whispering flight had become the morning's second wind. She sent 3 toward the den and 3 toward the plane. "Show me," she said softly. And the glass obliged. The cliff, the cracked light, the enormous cat thing moving like low thunder, a wake of dust trailing like a veil. Elira, despite herself, smiled. The body language was focused grief, not rage. Then a ping from the den. The drone's thermal feed showed the last hour's footprint of 3 smaller bodies, 2 with stride lengths hovering on the edge of Stablegate. One still in that charming chaos where the hind feet overtake the front and momentum does the rest. The tracks ended at a section of wall where the rock was slicker, like cooled glaze. A fissure there, narrow enough that Elira wouldn't have looked twice. The drone glided in. The fissure widened into an air vent carved by ancient water and polished by something more recent. Along the tunnel sides, faint residues glowed aqua. Elira leaned close to the glass. "Bioluminescent oils," she murmured. "No transport." The glow was not the Mornclaw's typical green lattice sheen. This was colony resin fluorescing where it had brushed hide. Resin from packing crates, repair fibers, glue seams. The cubs had gone toward the smell of the foreign hive. Elira's skin tightened. Oh no, the alarms came then, because something inside the colony had finally understood. They were not loud. Loud alarms scared people into running in straight lines. These sang 3 notes, and then spoke. All personnel remain within sealed corridors. All external gates on delay. Pre-clearance only, med priority exempt, doors side and sealed. A child in Habitat S2 asked, "Is it a drill?" and was told, "Yes, sweetheart," because the person answering wanted it to be. In the machine shop, a welder turned off her arc mid-bead and envisioned the long, narrow list of things that could be called predator incidents in hydroponics. A botanist looked up at the condensation glittering like strings of beads and thought, "It's a beautiful morning to be eaten." Security Chief Rourke, finally fully awake, ran his tongue over his teeth and said to his second, "Turret Groups A and B on passive. If I see an auto-targeting round slip into a chamber without my say-so, I'll put you in a chamber." He strapped on his exosleeve and toggled a grid. The colony skins domes, corrals, sluiceways, yards stacked themselves obediently on his display. "Where's Cone?" "Outside," said the second. "Of course she is," Rourke said, and placed a call he knew she would ignore. He watched the matriarch's icon traverse the map and felt, helplessly, the old sense of awe he tried never to let out where his team could see it. Predators made us. Predators taught us tools, walls, fire, the taste of caution. Respect was an old hinge in Rourke's mind even as he readied the guns. Kellen didn't hear the alarms. The medbay's doors had sealed with the gentle finality of something designed not to worry you. The lights settled into storm sleep low, blue, like cloud shadow on shallow water. He turned, as much as the cuff would allow. The fever had found an abandoned warehouse in his head, and was stacking brightly labeled boxes sweet rot, old rain, tea from leaves that never lived. He thought, "I am late for something." He thought, "I promised I would do." He tried to assemble the words and found a long hall with no doors. There was a whisper like the lintroll sound of tiny hooked claws on woven fabric. He cracked one eye. Nothing. Breathed a little. Let the dream retake him. His throat felt thick, like he had swallowed his scarf. He swallowed again and thought about water. The room smelled the way rooms did after bodies had been fixed in them: alcohol, plastic, the faint animal of skin. Under that, something else he couldn't place. He was too tired to wonder. Near the floor, in the shadow beneath the cot, a nose appeared. It was not the wet black of a dog's nose. It was a seam in silver, delicate as a closing eyelid. It tested the air with careful sips. The head attached to the nose was a small rhomboid with oversized ears that winged to either side. The ears were back right now, petal close, the way leaves hug stems in wind. The fur lay sleek along a small spine, banded with a dim helix of bioluminescence that pulsed the rhythm of a heart figuring itself out. The cub took one step and then paused as if remembering a rule. Its siblings, bolder, slipped ahead. One went to the chair, placed its forepaws on the rung, and sniffed the hanging jacket like a scholar inspecting text. The other made a tiny half-sneeze and froze, as if apologizing to the entire planet. It lifted one paw and tested the edge of the cot. The cot's blanket was soft and warm and smelled like the thing that called to them. From far away: milk, body den, not den. Den was mineral and mother and the iron sound of her purr. This was the good other, like the way crushed aloe in the shade felt to the pads of their feet. They lifted their faces and breathed. Their whiskers ticked against the weave. Kellen's hand, half off the mattress, hung like a pale, tethered leaf. The bold cub touched it with the side of its jaw, somewhere in the labyrinth of sleep. Kellen's body experienced contact and filed it as cool, soft nothing to fear. The fever river shifted. The glass warmed. A patch of the dream developed edges again. A whisper of guilt rotated past the slag field. He had been on the far edge, hitching a cable to a collapsed sluice gate while the wind threw needles of glass. He had felt something move in the weather, the way you feel a fish turn under your foot when you're waiting. He'd looked back over his shoulder and seen, against the ridge, the shine greenish, like moss under skin. He'd opened his mouth to say Rourke's name. Then the sleet had slapped the world blank. The cub pushed its cheek against his knuckles. The bioluminescent band along its side brightened, then dimmed. The second cub, in the chair, made a trilling sound like a question. The third, shy, ambled into the wedge of shadow near the monitoring cart and sat, ears still pinned. The monitors muttered quietly. The door's seal lamp glowed squash blossom yellow. Kellen's fingers flexed. Without waking, his hand turned so his palm faced the small head. His thumb drew the absent shape of comfort. The bold cub purred or did what that sound was for its kind. A deep internal tremor that vibrated the air under the cot. The shy one, hearing the timbre of their own language in a room thick with foreign breath, exhaled and unpinned an ear. They made a small pile beside the human's heat. They were not heavy. They were dense the way new things are dense, as if determined to keep gravity honest. One set its chin in the hollow of Kellen's collarbone. Another worked itself between his ribs and the mattress as if he were a curve in the floor of a cave. The third lay along his forearm above the IV port with a care that looked learned, but was just luck. Out on the plain, the matriarch reached the edge of the colony's shadow. She stopped, not because she was afraid of the light their tethered sun made. She had learned that pain already, but because the grid of scent here was confusing as heat mirage. Paths crossed paths and turned into themselves. Air leaked in threads through seams where the walls met the ground. Ozone sharpened everything. Resin smeared her palate. She tasted and began to form, painfully, a picture. 3 thin ropes of scent, recent, not poured over by boots or washed down fluid yet because the morning had been young. When little paws had pressed dust, the ropes ran to a slot low in the wall, a service duct that someone had left imperfectly sealed. After a night repair and through it, the stab of the foreign hive's breath. She lowered her head to the seam and made a sound outside the range of human hearing. A subsonic pressure that told small bones how to vibrate. It rolled along floors and under doors. It found the echo of itself inside the med bay, faint as a remembered song. 3 small skulls tilted in their sleep. Their ears twitched. One paw kneaded the blanket and stopped, the matriarch back from the wall. She knew what came next, because the world she had built in her mind with its predictable rivers and reliable rocks had fractured. She would go closer. She would see the bright things' angles and edges as she had never seen them, because there would be no distance left to translate. She would stand in its shadow and in return give it hers. She would either unmake what had taken what was hers, or she would learn a new way to name mercy. She moved along the perimeter, found the place where the walls opened to let the hive's bodies pass in and out. The gate was not a hole but a mouth, lips of alloy, teeth of light. She pressed her nose to the seam and drew in. The little ropes were clearer here. She rumbled once, and the mountain listened and said nothing. Inside the colony, the quiet before recognition became the quiet made by fear. Illyra left the observation slit and walked the corridor at a controlled pace, because her body wanted to run and running would empty her, and she needed her oxygen. "Don't go outside," Rourke had said. She was not going outside. She tapped her wrist. The drone inside the den returned to her perch, obedient as a trained bird. The three over the plane fell into a triangle and dialed up their sensitivity. She considered waking Kellen, then remembered he was already awake to whatever poison fever invented. He had been stubborn even about his own recovery. "I can shake it off, Doc," and she'd said. Shaking is not the same thing as healing. He'd bleached the color from his jokes. After that, a new ping. She stopped walking. The med-bay. The drone she had, set to sweep interior corridors because she didn't trust the colony's own cameras with their habit of failing. At the worst times had turned its eye to the med-bay door on a routine pass. There was nothing to see and everything to scent. She could not smell what the drone could not smell, but she had taught the drone to be suspicious, and suspicion made patterns and air. She keyed the door. "Med priority," said the colony, indulgent. The seal lamp shifted from yellow to green. The door sighed back. Illyra stepped into the dim. Machines hummed, their lights gentle as tide pools. The air held the sweetness of the neurotherm's warmed polymer and the shadow of Kellen's fever sweat. It took her eyes one breath to adjust, then two. The cot was a shape. The human on it made the watchdog noises of sleep. There were, she frowned, three other shapes in the wrong places for blankets or folded clothes, or the particular mess Kellen made simply by occupying space. She came closer, and the shapes resolved into small ribs rising and falling in a three-time beat against a larger, slower drum. Illyra did not make a sound. She did not reach for her comm. The room felt, suddenly, like the precise second when a precarious stack of glassware is perfectly balanced and could fall, but hasn't chosen yet. Even thought might make it shiver. One of the cubs opened one eye. Its pupil was an elegant blade. The eye looked at Illyra as if she were a contour added late to a map. The gaze was not worried. It was not even curious. It said, "You are not the thing that keeps us warm. We have chosen the thing that keeps us warm. You belong to the space around that." The cub shut its eye again and made a small sound in its throat. Kellen's hand, the one not married to the IV line, lifted in the soft, blind way of a human hand finding a cat in the dark. He did not wake. His fingers found pelt and still. Illyra let out the breath she had been holding by mistake. Behind her, in the corridor, security's boots approached, their rhythm precise, their urgency attempting to be smaller than it was. Rourke would enter. Protocol would darken the room with commands. Weapons would fill the doorway with old human decisions. Illyra stepped backward to meet them. She held up her hand before anyone could speak. "Quiet," she said. "You'll wake them." And that was how the story's first chapter was written in the colony's memory. A scientist with her palm raised against momentum. A security team catching a command they had not expected from a person who outranked them only in weather and bone. A human asleep with three small, bright lives pooled against him like questions with their own answers. Outside, at the gate, the matriarch placed one paw on the alloy threshold, and the metal gave a little under her weight, remembering the planet. She lowered her head to the seam where warm air leaked and exhaled, sharing her breath with the hive. The door did not open. The alarms did not change their minds. The sun climbed. Inside, three cubs slept beside the human. The colony balanced on the thin lip between what it had been and what it might be. And for a few slow heartbeats, nothing moved but breath. The colony's lockdown corridors had a way of making footsteps sound like intentions. Rourke's security detail moved in double file. their boots a percussion Alira wanted to mute with her bare hands. She stood at the medbay threshold like a cork holding back a flood. "Explain," Rourke whispered. Though his whisper carried the weight of a command, Alira raised her hand a fraction higher, palm outward, as though she could slow sound itself. She angled her body so the door's line of sight into the room was narrow. Her voice was low and threaded with urgency. "Not weapons," she said. "Not even noise. You need to see it without making it worse." The younger guard, Salvi, tried to peek around her. He was all jaw and restless shoulders, knew enough that fear still sparked as eagerness. Rourke shot him a glare that stilled him. Then he motioned Alira forward. "Show me," he said. She stepped aside, letting the medbay open to them like the first frame of a forbidden film. Kellen lay slack on the cot, mouth parted slightly, fever glossing his skin. The neurotherm pad pulsed beneath him. Draped across his chest, one mornclaw cub breathed in tiny hiccuping rhythms, its flank glowing with faint phosphorescence that pulsed as though answering Kellen's heartbeat. Another lay coiled along his arm, muzzle tucked against the vein the needle pierced. The third, the smallest, sprawled across the curve of his stomach, paws twitching as if dreaming of a hunt it had not yet learned to make. Rourke froze. Not even his jaw moved. Salvi swore under his breath. Alira whispered, "They chose him." "Chose?" Rourke's whisper was a rasp. "They should be tearing him apart. They're young," she said. "But still they should be frightened, defensive. Instead they've imprinted. See how their pulses sync with his? That's not accident. That's instinct at work on something none of us thought possible." One of the cubs stirred, blinking its blade-slit eyes. Its ears flicked toward the sound of Rourke's voice, then flattened. It made a soft, subsonic tremor. One Alira recognized, a warning designed to vibrate the ground more than the air. Rourke lifted his hand slowly to signal retreat. His men stepped back one pace. The cub relaxed, curling again into Kellen's ribs. Salvi leaned close to Rourke and muttered, "Sir, we should trank them. Move them out before the mother scents them here. And put what scent on them, Salvi." "Ours," Rourke replied sharply. "Do you want the matriarch to think we carried her cubs off?" Alira intervened before Salvi could argue. "The matriarch already knows. She's at the perimeter. If she scented them here, she'll come to this door. That means every decision we make now isn't about protocol, it's about survival." The cub at Kellen's chest lifted its head and yawned, showing teeth like shards of new glass. Its tongue curled pink against the glow of its throat. Then, as though satisfied no threat lingered, it set its chin back down on Kellen's collarbone. Rourke stared, then shook his head. How the hell did they even get in here? Alira's mind was already working through the sequence. She spoke as if lecturing herself as much as anyone. "The cubs are at exploratory age. They followed colony resin sent through a fissure in the ridge maintenance crews. Probably patched ducts with adhesive they didn't scrub down. Once inside, they wandered. And where does wanderlust end? At warmth, at rhythm. They found Kellen, and stayed, she confirmed. Kellen stirred then, shifting under their collective weight. His fevered dream pressed him toward waking. His eyes cracked open, glazed with sleep and heat. For a moment he didn't register what pressed against him. Then awareness landed like a stone in still water. His gaze widened. He didn't move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. "Alira." He whispered, hoarse. "What? Don't startle them," she said gently. "They've made you their nest." Kellen blinked down at the glowing bundle across his chest. Its small whiskers twitched against his skin. His expression went through disbelief, then fear, then something stranger and odd tenderness. "I should be dead," he murmured. "Probably," Rourke said grimly from the door. But Alira shook her head. "No, you should be honored. They've never done this with us. They're predators, and yet, they trust you." Kellen laughed softly, the sound edged with exhaustion. "Trust me? I don't even trust me right now." The cub at his arm kneaded once, claws just pricking his skin, then gave a tiny sigh and tucked its head deeper into the crook of his elbow. Kellen winced, but didn't move. Alira stepped closer, lowering herself into a crouch beside the cot. Her voice softened to a murmur meant for both human and cubs. "Kellen, listen. Their mother will come. She will follow their scent here. If she sees them safe, if she sees you safe with them, we might avoid a massacre. But if we separate them now, or if the cubs panic, She'll interpret it as abduction. Kellen swallowed. So what you're saying I'm supposed to babysit? Illyra smiled despite herself. More like be their shield. Their bridge. Rourke swore quietly and rubbed his temples. You're gambling the colony on a fevered engineer and 3 alien kittens. Illyra's eyes never left the cubs. I'm not gambling. I'm observing what's already happening. You can't order biology to follow protocol. You can only follow biology where it leads. Outside, faint but rising, came a tremor in the walls, the matriarch's subsonic call. It vibrated the air vents and rattled the saline bag above Kellen's cot. The cubs stirred again, ears flicking. They didn't leave Kellen's side. Instead, they pressed closer, their small bodies trembling but not fleeing. Rourke's face hardened. She's at the gate, Illyra nodded. And she knows exactly where her cubs are. Kellen shut his eyes briefly, then opened them again with grim humor. Great. I always wanted to meet the in-laws. Asterisk. Deep, tectonic, as though the ground itself had grown vocal cords, the matriarch's call. It rolled through the colony's alloy bones, into the sealed doors and trembling water pipes, through the soles of every colonist's boots. Even in habitats 3 domes away, children cried and adults stopped mid-task, the vibration tugging at the instincts that lay dormant in human marrow. Predators spoke a language older than civilization, and every body that heard it remembered that the gates shuddered. Contact, Salvi breathed, pressing his shoulder into the wall as though to steady the structure with his own frame. Rourke didn't answer. He was watching the pressure gauges on his wristband dance like the needles of an overclocked meter. One by one, turrets clicked into readiness. He snapped a hand signal. The gunners froze their triggers. If even one shot flew, he knew the matriarch's fury would be absolute. Through the reinforced viewport, Illyra saw her first. The Mornclaw was not simply large. She was monumental, carved from every nightmare humans had ever sketched of fanged deities. Her shoulders rose higher than the gate's towers. Her claws left furrows in alloy panels meant to resist impact vehicles. Her bioluminescent vining ember shot with green pulsed furiously along her flanks, as if her blood were visible, lit by rage. Yet her eyes, Illyra noted, were not wide with fury. They were narrowed, searching, intelligent. She knows they're here, Illyra whispered. Rourke grunted. Then she also knows what we've got aimed at her heart. Illyra shot him a look sharp enough to cut alloy. If you fire, we're finished. Not if we drop her fast enough. She won't die alone. Rourke had no retort to that. His silence was agreement he didn't want to voice. Inside the med bay, Cullen sat up as much as the furline allowed. Sweat slicked his forehead, but the fever felt distant now, drowned by a surge of clarity, danger at the gate. The cubs felt it too. Their small bodies had gone taut, ears straining, pupils dilated to black slivers. Yet none of them left him. They pressed closer instead, trembling against his warmth. You feel that? Kellen murmured. His voice trembled in tandem with their small bodies. That's your mother, isn't it? One cub gave a faint trill, as if answering. Kellen exhaled, long and shaky. Yeah, I thought so. The door hissed open. Illyra slipped inside, shutting it quietly behind her. She looked pale under the blue lights, but her eyes were fire. She's at the gate, she said. I gathered, Kellen muttered. Everything inside me wants to crawl under this cot and stay there until she goes away. You can't, Illyra said simply. She came closer and crouched again beside him. Kellen, listen carefully. She's not here to slaughter us, not yet. She's here to reclaim her young. But the cubs don't want to leave you. If we force it, they'll panic. If she sees their fear, she'll think you hurt them. And then, Illyra didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Kellen closed his eyes. You're saying I'm the hinge. If I stand, maybe the door stays open. If I falter, it slams shut and crushes us all. Illyra nodded. You've already been chosen, whether you like it or not. Kellen looked down at the cub draped across his chest. It blinked at him, unafraid, and pressed its jaw against his sternum with a vibration like a purr. He let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. Right, he said. Then let's not keep Mom waiting. The gates opened with a groan of stressed servos. The colony had never opened them for a predator before. Usually, turrets bought time, while floodlights and concussive sound drove the creature back. Now the alloy lips parted willingly, like a mouth preparing to speak. The matriarch stepped forward. Her shadow swallowed the forecourt. Colonists clustered on the upper balconies held their breath. Some prayed, some recorded, hands shaking so hard their lenses jittered. All waited. Kyle emerged slowly from the corridor. He walked barefoot, hospital robe flaring in the wind like a flimsy banner. Every step cost him. Fever still clung like lead to his limbs. Yet he did not falter, because the cubs were with him. One clung to his shoulder, claws hooked gently into fabric, glowing veins streaking his collar. Another trotted at his heel, occasionally brushing against his calf as if reassuring itself. The third perched in his arms, head tucked beneath his chin. Gasps rippled across the balcony crowd. The matriarch froze. Her nostrils flared. Her gaze fell on Kellen, and the weight of it pressed like gravity. Kellen's legs wanted to buckle. He forced them still. He inhaled once, deeply, and spoke. "They're safe," he said hoarsely. His voice broke on the word safe, but he kept going. "They found me. I didn't take them. I didn't hurt them. Look." The cub in his arms lifted its head then, giving a small chirr. Its eyes, mirrors of the matriarch's, glowed like amber shards. For a heartbeat that stretched eternity thin, the matriarch's lips peeled back. Muscles bunched in her haunches. Colonists on the balconies reached for weapons they dared not use. Then the predator lowered her head, not in attack but in acknowledgement. The cub squirmed with excitement. One leapt from Kellen's arms and bounded to her, pressing its tiny body against her enormous paw. Another ran circles around Kellen's legs, torn between dissenters of gravity, mother and human. The third hesitated, then stretched its neck to lick Kellen's chin before trotting to join its siblings. The matriarch's eyes locked on Kellen once more. This time the gaze carried something more complicated than hunger or fury. It was calculation. Recognition. Elira whispered into her calm from the balcony. "She's accepting him," Rourke muttered back. "Or she's memorizing his face so she knows which one to kill later." But Elira shook her head. Her pulse raced with awe. "No, look at her stance. This isn't rage, it's treaty." The matriarch rumbled deep in her chest, a sound that rattled every rib in Kellen's body. He swallowed, heart hammering, but didn't flinch. He lowered his gaze slightly, instinctively respectful, though he never took his eyes fully from hers. And in that silent exchange, a new balance formed. The predator would not slaughter. The human would not flee. The cubs would not choose between them. The colony, watching from every level, realized it was witnessing the impossible, the first accord between species, whose histories had only ever been written in blood. The matriarch gathered her young with a sweep of her tail. She turned, slow as an eclipse, and padded back through the gate. But at the threshold she paused, looked back once. Her eyes met Kellen's again, then she was gone, leaving silence so deep the colony could hear the static in its own calms. Only then did Kellen's knees give way. Elira rushed forward and caught him as the cub's warmth left his arms. He sagged into her shoulder, trembling with exhaustion. "She didn't kill me," he murmured. "That's something." Elira's voice was fierce with wonder. "She didn't just spare you, Kellen. She marked you. You're a part of their story now, above them." Rourke exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. "God help us," he muttered, "because I think that means we're part of it too." Even after the gates sealed and the matriarch's shadow withdrew into the black ridges, the air thrummed with adrenaline. Families huddled in corridors, whispering stories to each other, as if retelling might make the event safer, smaller. Security ran checks on every turret twice, then 3 times, as if readiness might prevent déjà vu. Scientists downloaded every byte of sensor data until the servers whined. Children drew glowing cats with stubby crayons on the plasticrete walls, ignoring their parents' half-hearted protests. Kellen, however, slept for the first time in days. Exhaustion broke him like a fever. He dreamed again of rivers, but this time they were not fever rivers that scalded and shattered. They were cool, glassy streams with soft beds where shadows of cubs played, their tails curling like reeds. Somewhere beyond the dream, monitors chirped steady rhythms instead of anxious spikes. Elira sat beside his cot, writing by hand in her leather-bound field journal, a habit she refused to abandon to screens. The meeting be morning. The colony's council demanded answers. The chamber smelled of stale air and too many voices. A ring of representatives faced Lyra and Rourke across the long table. Kellen was absent, still regaining strength under Med's supervision. But his name rippled through every conversation. "You're telling us," said Counselor Ree, stabbing the table with a stylus, "that a Mornclaw, the same creatures that tore apart our survey convoy 5 years ago, entered the colony perimeter, found her young in a human's arms, and simply left." "She didn't simply leave," Lyra said evenly. She acknowledged Kellen's role. It wasn't submission, but it wasn't aggression either. It was recognition. Recognition of what? Counselor Dane scoffed. Ownership, custody. That man was practically a walking incubator of pathogens. Maybe the cubs were just confused. They weren't confused, Lyra shot back. They sensed with his biometrics. I recorded their heart rhythms. They weren't merely calm, they were aligned. That's not accident. That's choice. Rourke cleared his throat, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. Choice or not, the fact remains, we're alive because of it. If the matriarch had thought we'd harmed them, you wouldn't be sitting here arguing. Murmurs spread like fire along the table. Counselor redrummed fingers against her stylus, calculating. "So what are you proposing, Doctor? That we adopt their cubs? Enter into a peace treaty with an apex predator?" "I'm proposing," Lyra said carefully, "that we acknowledge the possibility of coexistence. Last night was the first evidence that the Mornclaw's hostility isn't fixed, it's contextual." Kellen became context. "That means there's a path forward. And if we're wrong?" Dane challenged. "Then we die anyway," Rourke muttered. "But at least this time we'd die trying something other than bullets." The council chamber went quiet. Kellen's awakening when Kellen woke again. The room was filled with gifts. Not flowers. Flowers were luxuries, the hydroponics. They couldn't spare but tokens. A strip of woven cloth from a child, a carved stone polished until it gleamed. A ration bar with "thank you" scrawled on the wrapper in marker. He sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in his limbs. The fever had broken, leaving his skin clammy, but his mind clear. Lyra entered with a tray of broth and a rare smile. "You're a celebrity now," Kellen groaned. "That's the last thing I wanted. It's the first thing we needed," she countered. "You've given this colony a story it can live by, instead of die by." He took the broth, sipped, then asked the question gnawing at him. "The cubs, where are they?" Lyra hesitated. "With her. Back in the ridge." A pang went through him, unexpected and sharp. "Do you think they'll come back?" Lyra studied him. "I think they'll follow the path they choose. And from what I saw, that path may still include you." Kellen laughed softly, shaking his head. "Great, predator daycare. Just what I needed on my resume." But beneath the humor, he felt it. The absence beside his ribs were warm. Glowing bodies had once slept. He hadn't realized how quickly they had become a part of him. Watchers in the ridge days past. Patrols reported no signs of aggression, but sightings increased. The matriarch lingered at the edge of visibility, a silhouette carved against the obsidian horizon. Sometimes, at night, the cubs' calls echoed faintly, closer than they should have been. One evening, as Kellen tested his strength walking along the outer dome's perimeter, he felt the vibration before he heard it, a low, thrumming purr that resonated in his chest. He turned, and there perched on a rock outcropping was one of the cubs, its glow-painted stripes across the stone. The cub trilled once, then bounded back into the shadows. Kellen stood frozen, torn between awe and fear, until Lyra appeared at his side. She'd been following his progress like a shadow. "They'll keep testing the boundary," she murmured. "Not just the cubs, the mother too. They're waiting to see if we hold our end of the unspoken bargain." Kellen's mouth felt dry. "And what end is that?" "That we don't betray the trust they've given you." A colony changed weeks later. The colony no longer spoke of Mornclaws only as monsters. They spoke of the family on the ridge, of Kellen's cubs. Turret drills were still held, but with reluctance rather than hunger for vengeance. Children no longer drew only domes and starships in their lessons, they drew glowing cubs. Curled beside a man in a bed, not everyone believed. Dissenters muttered that predators were predators, that teeth and claws couldn't be negotiated with. Rourke kept the weapons primed, his jaw set like a locked hatch. "Hope for peace," he told Kellen once, "but keep your boots by the door." Still, something had shifted. A new possibility had been carved into the future like a fissure that led somewhere brighter. The last visit in the 41st day after the cubs had first vanished. Kellen woke in the night to a sound outside the med bay. Not alarms, not boots. A soft scrape, rhythmic, like claws on stone. He stepped into the corridor barefoot, following instinct. The air smelled faintly of ozone and resin, but beneath it, wildness, fur. The metallic tang of predator breath at the outer viewport. He saw them, all 3 cubs, larger now, glowing brighter, sat in the moonlight like stars given bodies. And behind them, the matriarch. She didn't roar. She didn't growl. She simply stood, her eyes locking onto Kellen's through the glass. The cubs pressed their paws to the barrier. Small pads Splayed.Kalian lifted his hand and pressed it back, his palm aligning with theirs through the cold alloy-glass. For a long, breathless moment, predator and human shared the same silence. Then the matriarch turned, gathering her cubs, and melted back into the ridge. Kellen stayed at the viewport long after they vanished, hands still on the glass. He knew they would return, not every night, not predictably, but enough. Enough to remind him that trust was no longer impossible. Epilogue: when new colonists arrived years later, wide-eyed and wary, the veterans told the story with a strange pride. They spoke of the night the gates had opened, of the predator who chose not to kill, of the cubs found sleeping beside a human, and always. They ended with the same words: the predator's cubs went missing. They were found sleeping beside the human, and in those words, the colony remembered that survival wasn't always about walls and weapons. Sometimes, it was about warmth shared across the impossible gap of species, about the courage to stand still when everything screamed to run.